I'll tell you a side note. It's hard to teach your dad something. That's
Amen to that. Hi, this is Gary Smith with the Nectar Bridge podcast, and we're joined today by my guest Hunter Garnett with Garnett Patterson Injury Lawyers. Hunter and I met recently, and I wanted to bring him on to talk with business owners about liability, insurance, and how to protect both themselves and their workers. Hunter, tell us about yourself and your firm.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to come on to the show. You know, when we met, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do because you seem to have a similar, your target audience is the kind of people that I grew up with. Yeah. Hardworking, self-employed, small business owners. And both my parents are self-employed, small business owners. My dad owns a lawnmower shop in Huntsville. And so I see some of the mistakes that he makes, and I try to help him as much as I can. I'll tell you a side note, it's hard to teach your dad something. That's
Amen to that.
If there's any second generation business owners here listening, you might want to think about it. If you think you're ready to run the family business and your dad's doesn't think you're ready, you might want to do your own thing for a little while, merge them later, you know. But anyway, so I'm a practicing attorney now. I'm the first attorney in my family. Didn't even know an attorney when I went to law school, and I represent people that have been hurt in bad accidents. Most people that are hurt in accidents are working class people. You know, a lot of laborers, a lot of contractors, even plant workers. You know, people that travel, commute for work, people that drive as part of their job in between job sites. And so I see a lot of people get hurt, and they rarely have the appropriate insurance in place. I have small business owners come in my office all the time. One of the last text messages I got actually was somebody that got sued, and it's a workers' comp issue, and they don't have adequate coverage in place. I think they're going to be okay, but having the wrong coverage in place can be a death sentence for a small business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Where did you go to law school?
I went to Cumberland in Birmingham, and I'll tell that kind of background. So I grew up on a farm. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I studied ag business in college, really kind of planned on either going back to my grandfather's farm or maybe starting this lawnmower shop like my dad. And just through a series of very fortunate events, the Lord opened some doors and kind of had the right people encouraging me. I decided to go to law school on a scholarship. And then in law school, to be candid with you, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I did not fit in law school. I remember distinctively one day overhearing some kids, fellow students, talking about their dad's boats. And it just so happened my dad had just bought a boat the weekend before, but he bought a 16-foot Johnson, flat bottom. But I mean, and I was actually excited. I was going to take it and go burn 5 gallons of fuel and ride around Smith Lake. And these guys, I heard them talking about their dad's boats. I was like, one of us, either y'all's don't have a boat or I don't have a boat, because these two, what you're describing and what I have is two very different things. So anyway, chip on my shoulder in law school is just different. Growing up middle class, blue collar, and being around. It's the first time I'd been around a lot of money, a lot of wealth. And so came to Huntsville and immediately knew I wanted to represent just normal middle class, upper middle class, self-made people. And plaintiff's personal injury is kind of where I found that my people needed to be served.
Okay. I know we've started off talking about business, and certainly, business or on-the-job accidents are a big part of it, but also feel free to describe more generally. I know on the website it mentions motorcycle accidents, for example. So talk about the whole menu for a second, if you would, just like what all kinds of injury cases you end up involved in.
Yeah, so I do pretty much anything that involves suing an insurance company is within my wheelhouse. Somebody could be self-insured, like a big corporation or something. Car accidents are most common. Motorcycle accident, workplace accidents, even some breach of contract type stuff, especially for friends. Do some of that kind of work, not a lot. So pretty much anything that involves filing a lawsuit against an insurance company is in my wheelhouse. I'll tell you through that process, you learn every type of, people, when everybody thinks of something different when they think of insurance.
Right.
If you're, middle class, lower middle class, living paycheck to paycheck, auto insurance, but that's your whole world. If you're a small business owner, start thinking about commercial insurance. If you're, you start having family, you start thinking about life insurance. So we see a gambit of things. And for your audience, I think a few things that are worth talking about is, just common holes that we see in coverages for small business owners. you can get as niche as you want. Cybersecurity insurance, it really probably is not a good investment for most people listening to this, because it's only going to cover you. There's exclusions for every, kind of negligence on your part or negligent on your employee's part. And guess what? If you get hacked, it's probably because you did something kind of goofy, something silly.
Yeah.
So, that's an example of something niche that people always get wrong. Workers' comp is another one that's very, very common and often done inappropriately. And depending on who your carrier is, they can catch this and you can be on the hook for a lot of money. But, a contractor has some obligations to ensure that not only his direct W-2 employees are covered by workers' comp, but also his 1099 subcontractors, whether they are legitimate subcontractors or in kind of the gray area. I'll tell you, if you're in the gray area, you're living on the edge if you don't have workers' comp insurance that knows about your gray area. And there's two things that we see very commonly. One is a workers' compensation audit. I had a gentleman come in here one day, and he had been sued by Travelers Insurance for over $1 million because he was running big jobs, 1099 subs for everybody, but he was running with crews that did not have workers' comp insurance. And so when he got audited and they discovered all that, they found out that there hadn't even been a claim made, but they sued him for $1 million. Now, we referred him to a lawyer, and I think they ended up settling for drastically less. I think it was like tens of thousands of dollars, less than 100, but it was still, something totally that he was blindsided by. Another example is like, if somebody comes into I represent a lot of Spanish speakers. They get hurt on the job accidents at a really high rate. If a Spanish speaker comes in here and he's a sub of a sub or whatever, they're rarely covered by workers' comp, to be candid with you. And so, what I'm going to do? If he's got a catastrophic injury, he broke his back, he's paralyzed, he lost a leg, he's got a brain injury, I'm suing everybody. I'm suing the general. Right. I'm suing the direct sub. I'm suing the sub. I'm suing everybody that's on that job site because I've got a catastrophic injury, and my job as the lawyer is to go find insurance, because realistically, most of these, like his boss, Juan, Julio, whatever it might be, he's not going to have the assets or the insurance coverage to cover his workers' injuries usually. So that's a really common mistake we see.
Yeah. Let me unpack that with you a little bit more, because I think that understanding, I hear so many people I talk with, sometimes clients and so forth, and they talk about, well, we're going to hire somebody as a contractor. And I think that there's a lack of understanding of how that contractor is qualified to be a contractor. And my own take on it, and I certainly want to get your take on it as well, because you've had more experience with this than I do. But in my opinion, you rarely, if ever, can just say to an individual, hey, I'm going to hire you individually as a contractor, and you're going to come work for me, with me, and I'm going to, put you on this job, and I'm going to tell you where to go, what to do, hand you equipment, and so forth. And of course, I'm kind of like rattling off classic tests of being an employee. In other words, you cannot just characterize somebody as a contractor for your own convenience instead of hiring them as W-2. Where you can hire them as a contractor is, for example, you have a job site or maybe a house you're managing for some reason, and as part of the overall project, you need landscaping done. Well, you can hire a landscaping company, and it's an actual bona fide, licensed, insured company. You can hire them to come in and do some portion of the work, but you cannot just hire somebody, hand them a shovel, and say, go do this landscaping, and we'll pay you as a 1099. So I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit more about that, and like, what are the real pitfalls to avoid when you're confronted with that kind of scenario as a general contractor or a company in general?
Yeah, I think one thing to remember is that there's different tests depending on what area law. Okay,
right.
So you can have an employee, you can have a contract relationship for tax purposes that,
right.
And it can be a different, and then for like employment law purposes, something different. And then for tort law, which is what we're talking about mostly,
Right. Yeah.
you could have contractor, employee, contractor. You could have contractor in all three. You could have employee in all three. And so, when it comes to taxes, what you're risking is not that significant. I mean, it is significant, but like the penalties are not that harsh, right? You back pay the employment tax, payroll taxes, and then I think there's a percentage of damages, and it's very, very exceptionally rare to have that even be audited and fleshed out. Okay, the middle one on employment stuff, similar. It's worst case scenario. It's not that bad. When it comes to tort liability, worst case scenario can be catastrophic if you don't have the proper insurance coverage in place. And you've misclassified somebody, then you can cause a lot of problems for yourself. So you kind of you either need to be certain you're classifying them correctly, or you need to be adequately insured that if you do misclassify somebody and they're entitled to whatever it is, then you're protected from that.
And you mentioned the really significant lawsuit that Travelers filed against someone. I'll be honest with you, that is a surprising consequence to me. But what I have seen myself is an employer gets audited for workers' comp, and the contractors that they have hired, even though they may have represented themselves as being, businesses, not just individuals, as it turns out, they don't have certificates of insurance. And the employer has not, gotten them from that company. Maybe they can't even find that company at the time of the audit. So what happens then, at the very least, is they get charged more premium.
Right. Yeah, and that's and actually I'm looking at mine right now. I get audited every year for some reason. This is a State Farm. And they want to, and it doesn't really, it's the reason this caught my eye is it doesn't apply to me. Like I'm a law firm, right? I'm not really, why do they want to know my contractors? I do have a couple contractors, but it's like an IT guy and a bookkeeper, right?
Right.
But I think this letter is geared towards general contractors, and it says all subcontractors your business used for the audited period and certificates of insurance for those subcontractors. And so, and they adjust for payroll, like my payroll goes up every year. So every year I end up paying twice in work comp premiums is what I thought. So, yeah. Well, let's talk about, and I think too, something to talk about is a proper entity structure.
Yes.
Most people that are listening to this probably, if you're self-employed or even on a small business, I'm talking like 10 people or less, 20 people or less, if you have an LLC, you may not be protected from commercial liability. Like you need at least, $1 million, $2 million in commercial liability coverage. If you've got trucks on the road, if you've got workplaces that you're in charge of, that's the bare minimum. If as your net worth increases, your coverage should increase as well. Something else is, I think everybody should have uninsured motorist coverage. Okay, underinsured motorist coverage, and if you it's part of your vehicles. It's a per vehicle policy, and it's pretty cheap. And for most small business owners, it's good. It'll cover you first of all, which is good, but also cover your workers. Where if they get hurt and it's not their fault, it's a car accident. It's a way to put $200,000 or $300,000 in coverage in their pocket, potentially, depending on the severity of the injuries. Right. That's called uninsured motorist coverage. You mentioned motorcycles. Anybody that rides motorcycles, you need as much uninsured motorist coverage as you can get on your policy, because again, it stacks, and pretty much I'd say over half of the $1 million plus cases that I have handled have been motorcycle accidents. And I know that sounds like a lot of money. A catastrophic injury, it's if you shatter every bone on the left side of your body, $1 million is nothing. That is. There's not that much left over.
We didn't even talk about this in advance. I don't remember telling you anything about this, but I was in a motorcycle accident in 2008. That was the last time I rode a motorcycle. And yeah, back in 2008, they were bad injuries, but when you say broke every bone on the left side of my body, that wasn't as bad as all that. I did have a hip injury and so forth. And it was $250,000 in 2008. There's been a lot of inflation in medical costs since then. So yes, $1 million doesn't sound like that would be that hard to get above that level at all. I want to come back to something you said just a second ago about net worth, or rather assets, I should say. Talk about the relationship between your assets, what are you worth and how much insurance you need to have.
There's no exact formula, but your liability coverage should exceed your net worth for sure. What you want to do is, so put yourself in my shoes. My job is to fully compensate my client, and ideally all that comes from insurance. But if I stumble across somebody that's got, a nice business, maybe some investment properties, a building they own, maybe they own mini storage, just came up recently, and they only have $250,000 in coverage, but they've killed somebody or they've, maimed somebody. Well, it doesn't come up a lot, but I'm going after whatever is out there, right? When you start getting up above $1 million, $2 million, it puts me in a position where it's really hard to turn down $1 million, $1 million offer on almost any case, even a death case. And in order to take the $1 million offer, I have to release you and your insurance company. I don't get to take the $1 million and then go after your house, your business, whatever. So, to make my decision hard, that's kind of where the number you need to be. If you're worth $10 million, it's going to be hard for me to get a judgment. It's a lot of work to get a judgment. It's a lot of work to garnish stuff. A lot of transaction costs involved in that. If you're worth $10 million and you have $2 million in coverage, I'm probably going to take the $2 million. I'm probably not going to try to go after the assets. Now, if you're worth $1 million and you have $25,000 in coverage, guess what? I got bad news. I know we're going to be garnishing something.
Yeah. And I would say along with that, I think that sometimes business owners do more thinking about legal entity structure and setting up LLCs and compartmentalize. I hear real estate people talking about setting up a lot of LLCs and compartmentalizing and so forth. And I'm not saying those strategies are necessarily wrong, but I also just think, man, buy enough insurance. Just get enough insurance.
Yeah. I'm getting through it. Okay. However you structure it, if you maim somebody, yes, you paralyze somebody, you kill somebody, I'm going to figure out how to get there if you've got it. And so I'll just give you an example. I've got a case worth 10 to 20 million bucks. It involves a death, and there's plenty of insurance, but even though there's proper structures, it would make more sense to close the entity that engaged in the wrongful conduct, but there's infinite insurance. And this is a multi-billion dollar, this is a company worth tens of billions of dollars, like the parent company. Okay. And so if they're worried enough to carry $100 million on this asset that's only worth $1 million, you should be worried about your small business. You can't just pull all the cash out of it, keep the assets separate. For the most part, I'm going to figure out how to get through.
Right. I also think people underestimate how difficult it would be to, say you have successfully compartmentalized that entity. Well, how much trouble is it going to be to, as you say, try to pull assets out of it? And even if any of that stuff's legal, ethical, are going to work, how much difficulty are you going to put yourself in when you just could have had enough insurance? It's kind of ironic that you say you're often going against insurance companies, but in a way, you're really a great salesperson for insurance.
Yeah, and that's and I want to I huff and puff a little bit because that's part of my the way that you maximize value of cases is by being aggressive and trying cases. I'm a trial lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So, my dad, for example, when I talk like this, it rubs him the wrong way. He doesn't like it. It's threatening, right?
Yeah.
But what I think about it from a compassion standpoint. Yes. Of everybody listening to this is probably a good person that if their employee or themselves hurt somebody due to carelessness, which is, it happens, right? Then you should want that person to be made whole. Okay. You should want your insurance company to settle that case. Not only, selfishly for your own benefit of just get me out of it. I don't want to go to court, but also you hurt somebody, you have to right the wrong. And that's what insurance is for.
Yeah.
So, but it's a sensitive topic for a lot of small business owners because they pay a lot of money in insurance premiums, and I recognize that. And what actually happens, insurance companies have pitted trial lawyers like me and small business owners against each other in the political arena, and kind of, casted my profession in a negative light. And some of my colleagues have earned our negative reputation. But there's really good trial lawyers like me that care about our community, wants to keep our community safe, and wants to stop the wrongful conduct from happening at all, and then just make it right when it does happen.
Yeah.
And it's a hard job. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to small business owners any chance that I get, because I'm not a big, bad, scary person. Right? I'm a good person that's trying to help my clients. And when you frame it that way, I think business owners tend to get it. It's just a cost of doing business to have good insurance to take care of bad things when they happen.
Now, you are kind of tall.
Yeah.
You can't tell because we're both sitting down, but Hunter is a guy you got to look up to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a small guy for sure. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about insurance companies too. So even though my work comp is with State Farm, I don't recommend State Farm. It's just a friend that owns that agency. Alpha's really good. Travelers is great. Anything you get from a broker is going to typically be a pretty good product. You want a commercial policy. I would avoid Allstate and their subsidiaries. They are not quite as well equipped for commercial coverage, in my opinion. I'm a really big fan of Travelers. I think every small business owner should have Travelers commercial, Travelers home insurance, a personal umbrella, and then their auto insurance under Travelers. And I've heard, I haven't confirmed this, I'm with Alpha, heard Travelers has some kind of VIP program for those insureds in that classification. And I've seen them pay really, really good money on a claim. And that's what you want, right? With a very, very a small fight.
In the environment we're in now, and I say we're in now, I don't know if it's anything altogether new, but there's been a lot of talk in the media and among insurance agents and so forth about insurance companies dropping insureds who have claims. I don't know if you got any advice around that, or just, I guess, probably the whole topic of minimizing your risks and avoiding claims. What are some things that companies can do to be proactive about keeping their claims down?
I think keep your eyes open. There's a lot of things that you can do if you're just watching your people, you're watching their conduct. You can observe whether somebody's a safe person or not. I think some of the things are a little extreme, right? You see some companies take it really, really far, and it affects productivity in a negative way. You don't want to do that, but you should be taking reasonable precautions. And I think step one is just being on the job site, watching people, leading by example, communicating in an effective way, constructive criticism.
Yeah, this is a term from more the accounting industry, but tone from the top. You talked about being on the job site, and the term tone from the top means you as the leader of your company or your organization or just your team or what have you, your actions speak louder than words. So everybody will tend to say safety first, but if then your crew sees you, go climb a tree with a chainsaw and do something stupid, what you're really signaling to them is safety second or third. We got to get this job done, so we got to cut corners if we need to, and that's really the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Hunter, anything else that you want to cover before we wrap it up?
I think that's all. Anybody that wants to have me look at their insurance policies, I'm glad to glance over it and see what their coverages look like. No charge on that. And really any way that I can be of service, any small business owner. I currently don't do business law type work. But I'm glad to make referrals, whatever kind of issues you have. I'm a bit ambitious. I don't know what the Lord has in store for my law firm right now. We're just accident and injury lawyers, but I have several close friends that are among the best and brightest lawyers in Huntsville, and they're devout followers of Christ like myself, and they take their faith seriously. And one potential vision I have for the future is to have a Christian law firm, just of some of the best lawyers in Huntsville. If we did that, I would definitely expand to serve small business owners. And so I'm super accessible. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. My personal cell phone number is 256-221-8967. And always glad to make a friend with another like-minded person.
Great. And I'll put the link to your site and that number in the show notes and so forth. I really appreciate your time. It was great to come on and have a conversation. These are very important topics for small business owners. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.